Last week, we looked at what the second part of Psalm 23 has to say about how God can lead us to a place of rest with green pastures and still waters, and how important rest is. Paul also talked about how we can learn to listen to God's voice and follow where he's guiding us. As Paul has already mentioned, this psalm was written by King David. But who, apart from the King of Israel, was he? Most of you have probably heard of David as the boy who fought and killed the giant. David was the son of a man called Jesse and was the youngest of 8 sons. His early life, before he became famous as the boy who killed Goliath, or later as the King of Israel, was spent as a shepherd, looking after his family's sheep. David was only between 12 and 14 when he became king. And if we were going to look at him purely in human eyes, he was not the best choice to be king, and no one thought that it would be him. But God says in Samuel, "The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." God was more concerned with David's character and his heart than he was about how old David was or how suitable in human terms he was for the job. David grew up as a shepherd, so this psalm would have even more meaning. He's not pulling some random metaphor out of the sky. David knows what it means to be a shepherd because he lived it. He knew all the sacrifice it takes to look after the sheep, how important it is to keep them together and safe. And through this psalm, David is saying that as he cared for his flock of sheep, God cares even greater for us. Something interesting I found out while I was looking into shepherds was that from the Hebrew word shepherd, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, we get the word friend. Who would you describe as your best friend? Is it a person or is it an animal maybe? Now, my best friend is a lady called Sarah that I met at college. But growing up, it was my little black Scotty dog called Hector, because he was always there at the end of the day to give me a hug, and he always knew when I was upset. But in biblical times, it wasn't dogs that were man's best friend, it was sheep. They were deeply bonded to their shepherd, and the shepherd was deeply bonded to the sheep. And as close as this bond was, it's nothing compared to the bond we have with God. This week, we're looking at the next verse from the psalm, which reads, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." David talks about going through the darkest valley. It's easy at the moment to imagine what the darkest valley might look like with everything going on in the world. But if you were to think as a sheep for a moment, travelling through a dark valley would be especially dangerous. It would be easy to wander off and get lost. There's most likely some dangerous terrain and rocky ledges, which you could easily fall off and get hurt. And then there are the shadows, which may conceal dangerous animals and creatures that might attack the sheep. But what does the darkest valley look like for us? What are the things that might be hiding in its shadows, waiting for you and me? In the world at the moment, there are lots of things that can scare us. The coronavirus, just to start with. There's the fear of missing out, fear of not fitting in, not being good enough, being scared of change. But it's important to remember that fear is something the enemy uses to continually get our eyes off the shepherd and onto the worst case scenario around us. Here, David is declaring that he will fear no evil. Words are powerful things. What we say to and about ourselves has a big impact on how we act and how we feel. So when you're in that valley and there are things around you frightening you, like David, you can repeat to yourself that I will feel no evil. You can even use it like a mantra if you need to, as a reminder that because we have God as our shepherd, we have no reason to fear, because he is with us even in our darkest days. A shepherd never leaves his flock behind. In the next line of the psalm, it reads, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." It's a bit of a strange image that two objects that basically amount to two big sticks could be a comfort, but they actually had two very different and important roles. They were the equipment a shepherd took to work every day, just like a doctor would take a stethoscope. The rod was usually a shorter stick that probably looked like a club or a rounder's bat, and its job was to defend the shepherd's flock against the wolves and other animals that might attack them. The staff looked most like what we would call a shepherd's crook, a longer stick with a hook at one end. The staff was used to guide sheep across open fields and along rocky hillsides. It was a handy tool for making sure they stayed on track, and when they wandered off, the staff could be used to gently pull themselves back onto the right path. The staff and rod are part of the same tool, both working together in God's gentle hands to remind us of his everlasting faithfulness and love. As children of God, we can take a deep breath, knowing that he is always with us, always protecting us, always guiding us, and always offering us a place of peace and rest. Looking back at your life, can you think of any times in your life where you have felt God protecting you or guiding you back onto the right path? Especially at the moment, with all the uncertainty and worry in the world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But remember, God is there to give you protection and to guide you. If you read carefully the first part of this verse, David says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley." The important word in that line is through. We may be in the valley now, but it does not last forever, because God is always guiding us through. With Corona at the moment, it's hard to know where we're heading, and every day there seems to be something new. But each day we are moving through, and there are good signs all around us to remind us that we are getting out of this valley. You can look around and see that nature is thriving, and that there are amazing people who have put themselves at risk to keep us safe and healthy. God is guiding us through, and each day we are one step closer to the other side of the valley and back to the green pastures and still waters that God is always leading us towards.